Hey everybody, welcome back. It's time to look at Unit 5, Lesson 1, Exploration 3. In this exploration, we are going to take a look at the cell theory and a little bit of the background about how it was established. When we talk about cells, it's important to understand that cells are a relatively recent discovery in terms of what we understand about the way things work. Up until the 1600s, there really wasn't the technology that existed that allowed us to be able to see cells, let alone learn anything about them. Now, Robert Hooke is a scientist that is credited with being the first person to view cells under a microscope. He looked at a piece of cork. This is his microscope right here. And when he looked at this piece of cork, he thought that the boxes in that cork looked like the rooms of a monastery. And so he is the one that is credited with coming up with the name cells. Now, obviously, microscope technology has greatly improved since the 1600s. Here's a picture of a more modern microscope like the ones we have in our class. And now with this use of more modern technology, we can learn a lot more about what is inside cells, including how they work, how they function, and how the different parts and pieces work together. Now, the cell theory has changed over time as we've learned more about cells and as more and more scientists have contributed their research to them. There's a brief timeline of scientists here that if you want to look at, go ahead. You can see how we've gone from discovering microscopes and using them for rudimentary processes all the way up to describing how cells are only able to reproduce to create other cells. But the cell theory itself is one of the first unifying concepts in biology. In other words, it's one of the first things that everybody has agreed upon in order to move forward with future research. Now, the cell theory has three basic parts. And again, these things have changed over time, but this is kind of where we've settled ever since we've developed the technology necessary to study them more in depth. First of all organisms are made of cells. This kind of goes back to one of those characteristics of living things, whether it's a plant or an animal, whether it's single-celled or multi-celled. The benchmark of the cell theory is that all living organisms are made of cells. The second key idea is that all existing cells are produced by other living cells. And that's an important idea because for a long time, scientists subscribe to this idea of free cell formation or spontaneous generation. And this simply does not happen. We'll talk about that a little bit more later on. But the second key idea to the cell theory is that all currently existing cells are only produced from other living cells. And then finally, as we discussed in the first unit, the cell is the most basic unit of life. You cannot get any more basic or simple and still call something alive. And now, just remember, that doesn't necessarily mean that a cell is basic or simple, but that the life itself has to be considered a cell at the most basic level. All right. This lesson's pretty short. Again, I'd highly recommend you go back and look at the scientists involved in this process, but these three ideas are the key.